All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a historical mystery that's been a real head scratcher for ages. The origins of the Hun Empire.
Oh, yeah. These guys.
You know those fierce warriors who kind of just popped up out of nowhere in the 370s CE?
Seemingly out of nowhere.
And really just flipped Europe on its head.
Yeah.
But where did they actually come from?
It's the million-dollar question, right? Tons of debate about it, especially that possible link to the Xiongnu Empire in Mongolia.
Oh.
That empire, it was a powerhouse, like centuries before the Huns show up in Europe. But it collapsed around 100 CE. So you're talking a 300-year gap. Tough to explain.
Yeah, that's a big gap. So is it just a coincidence? Or could there be something more? To help us unpack this, we're diving into, well, two recent scientific articles.
This is good stuff.
They use some seriously cutting-edge genetic research to try and crack this case.
Yeah, this is what I love. We're not just relying on those old historical records and guesswork. We're actually looking at the DNA of people who lived back then. And the findings. Well, let's just say they shake things up a bit.
Uh-huh. Oh, I love it when that happens. So how did they actually do this? It sounds like a massive undertaking.
Massive is an understatement, really.
Yeah.
They analyzed genetic material from hundreds of individuals across a vast time frame, 800 years to be precise.
Wow.
And the locations, they span all the key areas of this mystery. The Mongolian steppe, Central Asia, and of course the Carpathian Basin in Europe.
Yeah.
That's where the Huns set up their European empire, by the way.
Wow, so it's a real transcontinental detective story.
Absolutely.
So what'd they find? Did they actually make that link between the Xiongnu and the Huns?
They did. And this is where it gets really juicy, especially if you're, a Hun enthusiast. In Europe, specifically in 5th and 6th century burial sites,
Okay.
they found a small but distinct group of individuals with significant East Asian genetic markers, the same markers found in the Xiongnu people.
Wait, hold on. This is sounding like a real-life Indiana Jones movie now. We're talking about physical evidence connecting these groups across continents, across centuries.
It's pretty wild, yeah.
Yeah.
And get this, some of these individuals, they were buried in what we call Eastern-type graves. Those include artifacts, things that link them back to nomadic traditions, just like the Xiongnu.
So it's not just the genetics, even the cultural pieces fit.
Exactly.
So this is really painting a clearer picture of this connection between the Huns in Europe and that earlier Xiongnu Empire in Mongolia.
Yeah.
It's amazing what science can do these days, right?
It really is. It's like peeking through a window to the past. And hold on, it gets even more specific.
Oh.
Some of these European Huns, they shared specific DNA segments
Okay.
with high-ranking individuals from the late Xiongnu Empire. These segments, they're called identical by descent, basically, like fingerprints passed down through generations, showing a direct family link.
Whoa, hold on. Are you saying they found a genetic link to, like, the Xiongnu elite, like royalty and powerful families?
You got it. In fact, one individual, the link, traces back to someone buried in the largest Xiongnu tomb ever found. Can you imagine?
That's incredible. So does this mean the Huns who stormed into Europe were, like, a direct offshoot of the Xiongnu elite, carrying their lineage across, what, half of Eurasia?
Well, not so fast.
Yeah.
It's not quite that simple. This genetic link is huge, don't get me wrong. But the full picture is a bit more intricate.
Okay.
Most of the Huns in Europe actually had diverse ancestries, which tells us there was a lot of mixing and interaction happening on their journey west.
Oh, so it wasn't just one big group migrating en masse from point A to point B. It was more like a melting pot on the move?
You could say that. It seems the Huns' westward movement was more like a braided river, all these different tributaries flowing in, representing their interactions with other groups as they moved along.
So it was a gradual process unfolding over, what, generations? Rather than just a sudden exodus.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not just a pack your bags and go kind of thing. It was more like a centuries-long family reunion with a lot of detours on the way.
I like that, yeah.
And that gradual blending of cultures and ancestries, that really sets the Huns apart from some other groups who migrated into Europe at the time.
Right.
Like, you're thinking of the Avars.
Exactly. They arrived about 200 years after the Huns, and they came directly from their collapsing East Asian empire.
Yeah.
Their genes reflect that they kept much more of that original East Asian ancestry.
So the Avars, it was more like a sudden wave crashing in, keeping their original identity more intact.
Yeah, very different.
Unlike the Huns who, they seem to pick up influences mixed with different folks along the way.
Exactly. It shows you migration takes many forms, even empires. They're rarely these monolithic things like we picture them.
Hmm.
And we tend to lump these historical movements into neat little boxes. But the reality is always messier, more nuanced.
This is fascinating. We started asking, were the Huns and Xiongnu connected? And now we're seeing how different their journeys were, even though they both ended up in Europe. And those differences, they have huge implications for how each group impacted things. Not just the political landscape, but the genetic makeup of Europe, too.
That's a great point. It's not just about who shows up, it's how they got there, who they met along the way. This is really making me rethink how I usually visualize like migration and empires.
Yeah.
It really challenges those simple narratives we tend to build.
Definitely. So we've got this image now of the Huns' trip to Europe, like a slow burn over generations, mixing with other groups as they went. But what happened when they finally got there? Did they completely rewrite the genetic landscape of the Carpathian Basin?
That's where things take another turn. You'd think with all their political power, they'd leave a huge genetic stamp on the region, right? But the research says not so much.
Really? That's surprising. I figured a group that, shaped European history that much would have totally changed the region's genetics.
It's a natural thought. But
Yeah.
even with all that political muscle, their genetic impact outside those elite Eastern-type burials, it was limited.
So not a total genetic takeover, more like some blending at the edges.
Exactly. Picture a family recipe, passed down for generations, each family adding their own little twist. Hunnic culture, it wasn't static. It evolved as they met different groups. And while they had influence, for sure, they didn't erase what was already there, genetically and culturally.
It's almost like they came in, shook things up, politically, militarily, and then blended into the existing fabric, not just replacing it.
It's a great way to put it. It reminds us these migrations, their impact, have layers. Sometimes it's a huge shift in the gene pool. Other times it's more about cultures mixing, political upheaval.
This is really challenging how I usually imagine empires rising and falling, how cultures bump into each other.
Yeah.
I always thought you get these massive movements of people. That equals massive genetic shifts.
It's easy to simplify things, right?
Yeah.
History rarely plays out that neatly. It's messy, it's complex, and there are always surprises.
And those surprises, they come from the coolest places. Who knew we could analyze DNA from centuries-old bones and unravel these journeys across entire continents?
It's amazing what science can do, right? And it's not just about scratching that curiosity itch. It can totally change how we understand history, migration, identity, the whole shebang.
Speaking of identity, this research brings up a bunch of questions. If even powerful empires like the Huns, they were shaped by all these diverse influences, what does that say about how identity works, how migration has always worked?
That's what's so great about this kind of discovery. It opens up more questions than it answers, makes us rethink what we thought we knew about the past, see how complicated it really was. Migration, identity, building an empire, none of that's simple and straightforward. It's messy, it's dynamic, always changing.
It makes you realize history isn't just some static thing, it's alive. It's a story we're still figuring out. And with each new piece we find, we get a deeper, richer, more nuanced understanding of it all.
It also shows how important it is to avoid those simple stories we tell. Like the Huns, they're often portrayed as these barbarian invaders, wreaking havoc across Europe.
Yeah.
But this research shows a much more complex, nuanced picture. Their journey, their interactions, their impact on the places they conquered.
It makes me think back to what we were saying about the Avars. They came in like a sudden wave compared to the Huns' slow, centuries-long movement. Do you think that difference in how they traveled affected how people saw them when they arrived?
That's a great question. It's totally possible. The Avars, with their strong cultural identity showing up suddenly, they might have seemed more immediately threatening.
Yeah.
Whereas the Huns, who'd been interacting with others for generations, people might have seen them differently.
It's fascinating to think these different migration patterns, they might have shaped not just Europe's genetics, but the social and political dynamics of the time, like a ripple effect going way beyond just the movement of people.
And those ripples, we still feel them today. Their genetic and cultural legacies, they're still in Europe, shaping the diversity we see.
It's amazing those connections across time and space, and how what we know about them keeps changing with every new discovery. So what other secrets could ancient DNA hold about our past? Are we just scratching the surface of these intricate connections across time and space? Makes you wonder, what other mysteries are out there just waiting to be solved?
Well, Huns.
What if we could, trace the paths of other groups?
Yeah.
Or even individuals throughout history just using their DNA?
The possibilities are mind-blowing, really. Imagine tracking how languages spread,
Yeah.
or how agriculture developed, or even how social structures evolved, all through genetic analysis.
Wow.
Be like having a time machine, right? We could see not just where people went, but how they interacted, how they changed along the way.
It would completely change how we understand history, wouldn't it? Instead
Yeah.
of just focusing on the big events, empires rising and falling, we could actually look at the lives of everyday people.
Oh.
See how they fit into this grand story of humanity.
That's what makes this kind of research so captivating. It's not just about, dates and battles and who ruled where. It's about understanding the human story, all the messiness, the diversity,
Yeah.
how interconnected it all is.
It reminds us that we're all part of this massive narrative that goes way beyond our own little lives.
Exactly.
At the start of this deep dive, I thought we were just trying to figure out where the Huns came from.
Right.
But we've uncovered so much more. We've seen how their journey was just one thread in a much bigger, more complex story. Migration, interaction, cultures blending, all playing out over centuries and continents.
It shows you the power of combining different fields, too.
Yeah.
You bring together historical research, archaeology, genetics, and you get this rich, nuanced picture of the past. And we're only just beginning. As technology keeps advancing, we understand genetics better. Who knows what groundbreaking discoveries are coming next?
This has been an incredible journey, really. Started with one question and ended up with a whole new way of seeing history.
Yeah.
It's amazing how ancient DNA can unlock so many secrets and really challenge how we thought things worked in the past.
And the best part is, we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Who knows what other mysteries are out there waiting for us to uncover them? Maybe our next deep dive will reveal even more surprising connections, rewrite another chapter in the human story.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
It flew by.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling inspired to, hit the history books again.
Yeah.
Maybe even take a genetics course.
I might see you there.
The journey of discovery never really ends, right?
That's what keeps it exciting.
Absolutely. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.